there's something quietly happening right now that doesn't feel like regulation, and it doesn't feel like competition either. It feels more like pressure, the kind that doesn't make headlines but changes behavior. Banks aren't attacking crypto directly anymore. They're doing something more subtle. They're going after stablecoin yields, and they're circling companies like Coinbase. And if you're wondering why now, that timing question is the most important part of the story. This caught my attention because I almost dismissed it at first. I saw a few headlines, a couple policy moves, some commentary around stablecoins, and my initial reaction was, okay, same old friction between banks and crypto. But the more I sat with it, the more uncomfortable it felt. Not dramatic, not loud, just coordinated. And whenever I get that feeling in markets, I slow down and ask who benefits if this quietly works? What actually happened? Let's strip this down. Over the past stretch of time, banks and banking-aligned regulators have started to push back harder on stablecoins that offer yield or interest-like returns. At the same time, large crypto platforms, Coinbase in particular, are facing increased scrutiny around how they custody assets, how they generate revenue, and whether certain products look too much like traditional banking without being banks. Stablecoins, especially the yield-bearing versions, have become something like a shadow savings account for a lot of people. You hold dollars, you earn something on them, and you're not locked into a traditional bank. Coinbase sits right at the center of that bridge between old finance and new rails. That's not accidental. And now the pressure is showing up through policy language, compliance hurdles, and narrative framing around risk and consumer protection. Here's the part people aren't talking about. This isn't really about protecting consumers from volatile crypto assets. Stablecoins aren't volatile by design. This is about control of deposits. Banks live and die by deposits. That's their raw material. When stablecoins start offering yield, instant settlement, global portability, and transparency without a bank balance sheet in the middle, that's an existential problem. What stands out to me is the incentive mismatch. Banks can't easily compete on speed or programmability. They compete on trust, regulation, and access to the payment system. So if you can't out-innovate, you regulate the edges. You reframe yield as risk. You turn optionality into something suspicious, and you lean on the idea that anything that looks like a bank should be a bank, even if it doesn't operate like one. Coinbase becomes a lightning rod here because it's visible, compliant, public, and large enough to matter. It's easier to pressure the on-ramps than to shut down decentralized protocols. If you can slow the bridge, you slow adoption without banning anything outright. And psychologically, that matters. Markets respond to friction long before they respond to laws. There's also a timing element. Traditional banks are dealing with margin pressure, higher funding costs, and a generation that's less loyal to brick-and-mortar institutions. Stablecoin yields, even modest ones, highlight how inefficient the old system is. That's uncomfortable, and discomfort often shows up as regulation. So let's talk about where this could go without pretending there's only one outcome. One path is normalization through containment. Stablecoins survive, but only in tightly controlled forms. Yield gets capped, access gets permissioned, and platforms like Coinbase operate more like regulated utilities than innovators. This keeps banks relevant but slows down the pace of change. Crypto doesn't disappear, it just becomes less disruptive. Another path is fragmentation. U.S. banks and regulators push hard while other jurisdictions lean into stablecoin innovation. Capital flows where it's treated best. Dollar-denominated stablecoins continue to grow globally, but the U.S. loses some influence over how they're used. That's a second-order effect most policymakers underestimate. Control doesn't always come from restriction. Sometimes it comes from participation. The third path is pushback from the market itself. If users keep choosing stablecoins despite friction, banks may be forced to adapt rather than resist. That could mean bank-issued stablecoins, partnerships with platforms like Coinbase, or new yield products that look suspiciously like what crypto already offers. That's not capitulation, it's evolution under pressure. None of these paths are guaranteed. What matters is probability and momentum. Right now, the momentum is clearly towards tightening, but markets have a way of testing how far that tightening can go before something breaks or moves elsewhere. The takeaway for me isn't that banks are evil or that crypto is under attack. It's that incentives always tell the real story. When you see coordinated pressure on stablecoin yields and the platforms that enable them, you're watching a battle over who gets to define money's future plumbing. If this continues, the next move won't be dramatic. It'll be quiet adjustments, small rule changes, subtle shifts in what's allowed, and those are often the most important moments to pay attention to. As always, this is just my interpretation of how the landscape is evolving, not advice on what to do with your money. Markets are complex and outcomes are never guaranteed, but understanding the incentives at play, that's how you stay ahead of the narrative instead of reacting to it.